And so you can imagine my joy and my delight when I got to contact a true rock star in the world of community engagement, marketing, equity, and diversity in the performing arts. She is a consultant, a mentor, a teacher, an author, a lawyer, VP of Community Engagement at the New Jersey Performing Arts Center. And here's one of the things that she said that I hold very close to me. I firmly believe, she firmly believes, I believe along with her, but I will not take credit for these words, quotes around this. I firmly believe that the arts are the only pure vehicle that we have in today's society that cross cultural and ethnic barriers and allow people to transcend their differences. Those are words from Donna Walker-Kuhne. Those are words from the person who is going to be leading our next session. I'm now, of course, looking around very nervously, saying, Donna, please come forward. I had the great thrill of having dinner with Donna last night. It was a wide-ranging and extraordinary conversation, and I promise you nothing but fun, provocation, and insight over the next hour. Thank you so much. Welcome to Canada, Donna.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow. It is great to be back in Canada. I've kind of bounced between Toronto and Ottawa for various conferences, so I'm always happy to be here. How are you this morning? What a wonderful, brilliant, insightful presentation, Daniel. Just great. Really great. Thank you. And a wonderful opportunity for me to continue in that conversation. And I also want to respond to just a couple of the questions because I was just burning to respond to them. So I will in my words because I have answers to a couple of them. So what I'm going to talk about is really kind of the broad strokes of community engagement and audience development, to really talk about what my experience has taught me over the past 40 years, and to kind of share with you what I think, how I think that we can move the field forward. You know, in the field I include in the classical arts is also ballet, because I've done quite a bit of work in that area and understanding the challenges of being able to embrace audiences and have them feel that this is accessible to them, regardless of their cultural, economic background. In America, I believe our key challenge and issue we have is not race and ethnicity. I believe it's class. It's something we don't talk about. But essentially, it's people who just don't believe that they belong or they have the resources. And how do we start to shape that? The first thing we have to do is be honest about that. So that's just my own thoughts. So I'd also like to thank Catherine for reaching out to me, and of course this wonderful conference for giving me the opportunity to be with you here today. As Catherine mentioned, my background is quite varied, but frankly what informs everything I do is the fact that I grew up as a dancer. And so I see the world through the lens of dance, through the lens of art. So regardless of the fact that, yes, I prosecuted juveniles and viciously and aggressively, yes, I love to be an arts administrator and author. All of it is through the lens of being a dancer and really seeing how the movement of life, the beauty of it and the passion. So I just thought important that I share that with you. So this process of engaging audiences is really a journey of life. You know, it involves compassion, which we talked about, understanding this diversity of culture. And I love the idea that you're unpacking diversity in so many ways. To me, diversity is like an onion, you know, that you just keep peeling the layers. And hopefully you are including as many different kinds of ways humans exist as possible. And then also, as I mentioned before, class and other distinctions that also kind of separate us, such as religion and such as lifestyle, which are also important to consider. So today, I believe we have the opportunity to change our cultural lens, that's really what I think each of us are doing individually. Of course, we're looking at our own orchestras, we're looking at our audiences, but this is a personal journey. Each one of us is actually the change maker. It's not the them, it's us, it's me. And so it's like, how do I change my cultural lens to be someone who can advance this forward? And so this convergence of cultures that we're talking about transcends all of these various differences. So it allows us, to kind of look at who we are and how we complement each other. How do we celebrate each other? I also appreciate the Smiths acknowledgement in the beginning of the indigenous community. That's something, of course, we don't do in America. And I so appreciate that when I'm either in Australia or here in Canada. I think it's such an important moment, to be able to acknowledge where we are in the history and legacy. So thank you for making sure that that was included in the program. So I want to kind of talk about three main topics: audience development, innovation, and mentorship. And so when we look at this question of what is successful community engagement, what is successful to build audiences that represent the different communities we're in, I believe the answers are in dynamic leadership. I guess I should move. Are you doing this for me? Oh, you? Okay, great. Okay. Just wanted to make sure. Okay, so the answers lie. Actually, I'm going to flip the slides, but anyway. Can you go to the next one? Just because. Oh, okay. Okay, so I am doing it.
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. Okay. Oh, you're doing the French. Gotta pay attention. Okay. So the answers, I believe, lie in what you see here on the slide. Dynamic leadership. Nothing can happen without that. There has to be someone in charge that says, this is what we're going to do, and more importantly, provide the budget to make it happen. Community engagement, building diverse audiences costs money. So we want to be very clear about that. That's not being nice. It's not just having dinner with someone. It's a budget. It's a marketing strategy that requires the tools to execute it efficiently. So that's why we need the dynamic leadership. We also need dynamic leadership because someone has to say, okay, you may not be comfortable with this, but we're moving ahead in this direction. So when I first started working at the Public Theater in 1993, George C. Wolfe called me to lead a department that he told me, you call it whatever you want. So we called it Community Affairs. And he said, my job description at that time was to create an audience that looks like a subway stop. And so George was very clear. This was the new direction. He was leading the Public Theater. Of course, Joe Papp had passed on, and now George was in charge. And there were people who pushed back. There were some people who found this uncomfortable. One board member said, in fact, well, does this mean we're only going to produce plays by Black playwrights? And so it was this misunderstanding of, yes, we're going to create an audience that looks like a subway stop, but we don't lose anything. We add more chairs to the table. That's what the focus is. But you need someone in charge who will say that. So that's why I think dynamic leadership is so critical. Effective partnerships. Partnerships, to me, are the core of any successful engagement with various communities. There has to be this understanding that we are equal, number one. We're not serving anyone. There's nothing. I have a big problem with this word underserved because I don't know who's underserved. Are you under? Am I under? Who's underserved? So I don't use that word. What I do use is that there are individuals and communities who have not had access to the work and not have access because they haven't been invited. They may not know where it is. Perhaps they're sensitive about the price points. Not that it has to be free, but they have to understand the value of what it is that they're going to see. And so this whole idea of, partnerships becomes important. We are equal. You need me just as much as I need you. Because quite frankly, we talk about the genesis of this conference, and one of the themes is, to engage diverse audiences. The very communities that we want to engage, they're doing fine. They have chosen their cultural fulfillment. It's just not you. So we need to be real clear about that. They're fine. We're the ones who are reaching out to try to represent more of who we feel should be in the room. So that dynamic, when we talk about building partnerships, is critical. Not going in as the social worker, saving a community, fixing a social problem. We're not a problem. We're not a problem. So it's very important, I believe, to anchor yourself in a philosophical context before we do the work. We kind of have to do a refresh of who am I, what are my thoughts, what are my beliefs. So when I first started at the Public Theater, that's what I had to do, because frankly, I had grown up, I'm from the south side of Chicago. If anyone knows anything about Chicago, we know that that is comprised primarily of African Americans who migrated from the south during the 50s and 60s. So my whole world was very much African American culture. And then I worked at the Dance Theater of Harlem, which was at that time primarily African-American ballet company, and that was great. I worked there for 9 years. And then when George called me and he said, subway stop, I was like, wait a minute, that's people who don't look like me. How do I talk to them? Who are they? What are their sensibilities? What are their challenges? So I had to do my own research. I had to prepare myself and had to ask myself, how come at this stage of the game, you don't know anyone who doesn't look like you? You don't have the ability to engage different communities. It's not a judgment. It's an observation. And if you're in this work, it's something that needs to be corrected, to be fixed. So that's what I did. I hired people who did not look like me. The first step, my staff represented the communities I wanted to engage: Latino, Asian American, Native American. I read books by authors to start to understand what are the cultural nuances. And then I made sure that as I designed campaigns to engage these new audiences with the work that we did, that I had other people looking at it, because my lens is pretty much based on my cultural ethos. So how do I make sure that I'm being respectful of how Latinos come to the work, or Asian Americans, you know? And of course, those are political terms, and we use those very loosely, but they actually are not politically correct. And so that's the kind of preparation I believe we have to do before we even begin to think about how and the strategies and the unwanted toolkit that you mentioned. So other tactics that are important, I think are really critical: cultural ambassadors, which can be similar to your partners, but partnerships to me are long-term. Ambassadors may be a group of individuals, we call them tastemakers and influencers, who can open doors for you, who can say, actually, pay attention to this person. They're really cool. This is going to be great. Sometimes we need that. You know, we may not be the most efficient person to walk into the room and start to have a conversation about the work. You may need someone who people are familiar with, who can kind of lay the groundwork for you. So that's where the ambassadors can be very helpful. A lot of the work I've done in the field of dance, and by the way, I love classical music, but dance is my first love. But so it's not, you know, anything personal. It's just how I grew up, what I know. But working in dance, and a lot of work in dance, what I've learned, and the challenges in dance. Of course, classical ballet was a big challenge working with the Dance Theater of Harlem, and Arthur Mitchell hired me to engage an African-American audience, you know, because they were not coming to the performances as we toured around the United States. And Mr. Mitchell was very concerned, and he said, well, where are they? I mean, we're in major urban cities. We're in LA and Chicago. Where are they? And we realized that, one, they weren't being invited. Two, the presenters didn't know how to engage them. Three, the audiences didn't understand the work. What am I going to see? So we had to address each one of those, which we did over a period of time. And at the end of my tenure there, we had increased our attendance by 45% around the country, you know, bringing in more diverse audiences. But it was taking that dead on. You know, classical ballet. Who is that for? Who created that? What do the words mean? And then we didn't have Misty Copeland back in the 80s and 90s. And so we didn't have that Misty factor that just has really kind of transformed the field. And so it was really, you know, a very steady effort of educating the communities, taking the dancers to the communities, talking about what is Giselle, the story of Giselle, the story of Swan Lake, Cinderella, you know, the big ballets, as well as some of the neoclassical work that Balanchine, of course, developed, you know, that Mr. Mitchell had embraced. But it was a process. So none of this happens overnight. And I know all of you understand that. This is very much a journey, and that we embrace that. And so the ambassadors are really important. Legs that touch the ground, that's one of the things that they do. Also, it's the communication. How do we share, you know, what the work is about? This is not about dumbing down. I know one of the questions was this distinction about, you know, classical versus, you know, building community. It has nothing to do with dumbing down. I do believe we can do a much more efficient job of demystifying the work. Sometimes there's an assumption that everybody knows what we're talking about because we live in this world. We breathe it. You know, it was part of our DNA when we were born. You came out with instruments in your hand or notes floating through your head. That's great. But not everyone had that experience. So we have to think about, how do I demystify this work so that it's accessible and engaging and fun? There's joy in the arts. This is not an austerity. So we have to fight to make sure that part happens. And so demystifying to me is where we can have fun. We can play and decide what that looks like. And so one of the ways that I have done that, one of my clients, as Catherine mentioned, is the New Jersey Performing Arts Center, which is located in Newark, New Jersey, a city that is 79% African American. And we're a huge performing arts center. We have a $45 million budget. We have a 3,000-seat arena. And of course, we present all the arts. One of the series we present are classical music. We present the orchestras. When I first started there in 2012, we were presenting about 8 classical performances per season. We're now down to 3. And that is because of the audiences. That is because that we are seeing such a demise in the number of audiences. We're selecting artists that are successful and then reducing the number of performances. But what I've learned about classical music there in New Jersey is that when we take the time to demystify the product is when we start to see diversity in the audiences rather than waiting on the typical seasoned buyers and our older audiences and our board members. And so, you know, that has been a really great experience. And just 2 things I wanted to share with you about that in answer to the question about when did you really see the magic and the sparks fly. One is when we do Preludes. I'm sure some of you do those as well, you know, introductory experience to the performance, before the performance. So let's say the curtain is at 8, 7 o'clock, you have a prelude. So in NJPAC, we use these preludes as strategically as we can. One of them is with a local strings and instrument school called the Elizabeth Memorial School. And the students, of course, are excellent. Again, this is not about dumbing down. They are excellent, superb musicians from 1st grade to 8th grade. And the students perform in the lobby. And they perform only classical music there in the lobby. And this is in advance of the full production. So what we've done, a couple of things. We've monetized their experience because, as I mentioned, the budget is critical. And so in order for the students to perform in the lobby, they are asked to sell a minimum of 50 tickets. Well, that's very easy because you've got 100 students who have parents, grandparents, cousins, uncles, aunts. And so they usually sell over 200 tickets. So there's a value that immediately the institution can see. We can invest in this experience, but it's the joy of seeing these young people playing classical music with such pride and the feeling that we performed at NJPAC, not on the main stage, in the lobby. And then they all go inside and watch the performance. So what makes the performance different? These students have connected with the artists on the stage. They're playing the same music. The parents understand that my child who was in school was now in the lobby and one day will be on stage. I'm going to really pay attention. So there's a connection there, you know, and we see it. We do these at least 3 times per year with this school. Another one, a connection that we've had is with demystifying the word classic, because I think that comes with a lot of connotations depending on what class you're in or what economic background you have. And so the word classic immediately can mean, oh, that's something I don't understand. I don't even know what that is. In fact, I'm not even going to pay attention. Or is it more that classic based on your culture? So who's defining it? You know, who holds it? Who's in charge? And so there's a college that we work with called Farley Dickinson College, and we have a long-term relationship with them. And one of the things I do with their students is hold seminars from time to demystify the art. So we thought, let's take on classical music dead on. And so we did a panel discussion on what is classic about the arts. What are classical arts? And I had Virginia Johnson, who is now the artistic director of the Dance Theater of Harlem. And then I had one of the oboe players from the New Jersey Symphony Orchestra. Both of them had worked recently on Swan Lake. So that was the subject matter, Swan Lake. And they both talked about it from their own perspective. Virginia unpacked it as a ballerina. What is it like to perform this role, and why is it classic? You know, the music, Tchaikovsky, the choreography, what has preserved that over the years. And the musician, he talked about it as an artist. What makes it classic is our approach to the work and our history and understanding of the legacy. So these students who were exposed to that understanding felt so empowered. So when they got to our New Jersey Performing Arts Center to see the New Jersey Symphony Orchestra perform Swan Lake, they were all in, because we know this. We know the work. We know what the acts mean. We know what happened. We know the story. And so the musicians asked us, who was in the audience? Boy, they were awake. I mean, they seemed like they were really focused and engaged. And so these were students who had been prepared, you know, who really had a connection. So those were just two. Those two. Then there's just one more I have to share. I'm sure somebody familiar with the opera Margaret Garner. So I was able to work on that production when the New York City Opera presented it several years ago. Margaret Garner is an opera about a slave woman. It's a true story, slave woman who murdered her daughter rather than have her being brought up as a slave. And so obviously it's a heavy topic. And City Opera called my company and said, we would like to have an African-American audience for this play. Can you help us? And when they described the play, I thought, well, that's a real challenge. You know, you're talking about mothers killing their kids. I mean, gee. Whew, that's a tough one. And then, wait a minute, subtitles? Oh, Americans don't like that. And wait, 3 hours long? Oh, good grief. How am I going to do this? But loving a challenge like I do, we took it on. And several things happened that really made this a success, where we received a letter from the marketing director at the end of the run. It had, I think, 7 performances, who said, we had 37% African Americans in the audience, the largest number ever in the history of New York City Opera. So how we got to that number was several things. We looked at the landscape. How do we, first of all, demystify Margaret Garner? You know, who was this woman? And how do we take away the focus of the murder of her daughter to the social compass that came with this, her thinking and the circumstances in which she was involved? And so in New York, the best part was they gave us 6 months to work on this. You know, when you think about how am I going to transform my audiences, it's not, oh, gee, I got the brochure. We got a show coming up in a couple of weeks. Let's see who we can call. It's not going to happen that way. You need time. So 6 months was a good beginning. And so we, you know, first of all, we took advantage of all the outdoor concerts and festivals that happened in New York. And we took Margaret with us. We had the 3-foot image of her, and we would put it next to a table, just like right here, and we would have some of the collateral material, and we would have people come up and talk to us about Margaret. We just made her someone you would want to know. Let me tell you about Margaret, amazing woman. Yeah, she had a tough journey, but this is a decision she made because. And so people started to think about this woman. Gee, Margaret Gardner, never heard about her. And so we started to cross those bridges, and we must have done about 8 or 9 of those throughout the summer. At the same time, because they gave us an advertising budget, we were able to take out ads in the African-American media, which were shocked because so often the Broadway shows, commercial shows, expect the African-American media to do things for exchange. It's like, how do you pay the light bill with exchange? You need cash. You know, so there's a perception that the Black community is so grateful that Broadway or other commercial ventures are reaching out to them, that they'll be happy to promote it. And I was so happy that New York City Opera did not have that attitude, but in fact wrote a check, which enabled me to approach the media, and they were so pleasantly surprised. They tripled the value of our campaign. So rather than a 2-week campaign, we had a 6-week campaign to run print ads and radio spots. All of this at the same time as we're talking about Margaret on the street. The third thing that we did, there's always an opening night gala. There's a very popular caterer in the New York area. The name of her company is Spoon Bread. And she was invited to cater for the entire opening night. The first time a Black person, Black company had ever catered for opening night at Lincoln Center. And so this was huge news. People were so excited. It's like, oh, Spoonbread's going to do the food. They didn't even know where or what the show was. It was the fact that Spoonbread's doing the food. I'm going where Spoonbread goes. So we have to realize people have different portals to the arts. It's not always the front door. It's not always going to be because you're saying, oh, we're doing this great new work, you know. We just discovered some of Beethoven's hidden pieces or something. Not everyone has that connection, but they had a connection to Spoonbread. So that gave us additional leverage. And then I found out one critical piece of information. This was a huge opera. It had a cast of about 200. And there were lots of children because it took place on a plantation. And I know kids have parents. They have caretakers. And I know those parents want to have a full house. So you take advantage of this. So this is when I put on my marketing hat, which never comes off, actually. And so I asked permission, may I please speak to the parents at one of the rehearsals? And I was given permission, and I simply said, parents, I am sure you would like to have a full house of your friends and family to see your children's debut at Lincoln Center. So they're nodding. So to that end, all I need from you is your list of phone numbers and names of your friends, and I'll take care of the rest. And so they faxed me. I had a little form I created, and they, back in the day with the faxing, they faxed me all these forms. I must have got about 60 or 70 of them. I picked up the phone and I said, Jane, do you know your girlfriend Ann, her kids are going to be in this fabulous opera at Lincoln Center. She said you were going to bring a group of about 20. I just wanted to get your credit card from you. So I did that for all of them. So all of these steps led up to the 37%. So that's a luxury. You know, not everyone has that, but I just wanted to share with you what's necessary to be able to really cultivate and diversify our audiences. It's much more than just a thought. It's much more than just a dialogue. There's specific actions that we have to take. So just moving on, you know, so programming, which is what Margaret Garner also spoke to, I think is also what's critical, you know, when we talk about building these various audiences that we so dream of. So I wanted to share just some thinking from some of the leaders in the field. Of course, you're all familiar with the Metropolitan Museum of Art. You know, they have over 5 million visitors per year. The number 2 person in charge there, her name is Sandra Jackson Dumont. And I interviewed her for my blog to just get her thoughts on community engagement for a museum that has everyone's history and story, and then also a legacy. And so one of the points she made was, she said, some people are baffled by the process of audience development. They think it's either really simple and requires zero resources, research, and training, or they confuse it with marketing. Audience development is relationship building supported by marketing. It's much more than getting people to attend an exhibition. It's about making meaningful connections to what matters to individuals. One byproduct of audience development is attendance, but that's not the only reason. It's also having them understand the work itself. So she adds, at the Met Museum, this engagement helps us better shape inclusive experiences based on concrete input, rather than making assumptions about what people want or need. Everyone wants to feel welcome when they cross the threshold of what may have been perceived to be an exclusive institution. Our mission is to go beyond the welcome. We want to meet people where they are. And when I say where they are, I mean that in the broadest sense of the phrase. We want to move beyond opening the doors. We want folks to know they have the keys. I think that's an incredibly powerful statement. And so I ask you to ask yourself, you know, what efforts are you making in this direction? How do you cross the threshold? How do you go to where people are? So we can sit around and think about these great programs and wonderful performances, but who's actually going out to literally knock on doors to invite these very constituents that we want? That's the kind of effort I think that we are all looking for. Again, when I was at the Public Theater, after, you know, I recovered from thinking about this new job description of making the audience look like a subway stop, my first day was a blank desk and the Rolodex I brought with me from the ballet company. There were no resources there at the Public at that time. So when you think about how to start, the way I started was with the yellow pages. This was before Google. Some of you have no idea what I'm talking about. Because how can you live in a world without Google? But there was a time when we just used other resources. So the yellow pages, which is a directory of all businesses and individuals, I started to just do research, and I pulled out names and addresses of anything that looked interesting that wasn't a restaurant or, you know, someplace that may not have a connection to the arts. And we gave our campaign a name. We called it Cultural Explosions. And we called each place, and I simply said, hello, my name is Donna. I'm at the Public Theater, and we have a new initiative. It's called Cultural Explosions. May I come by and talk to you about it? And so most people say, well, sure, you can pop on over. I had no clue what I would say. You know, my background had been ballet. I didn't know anything about American theater. I'd seen maybe a couple of plays, a little bit of Shakespeare, but to be able to sit and have a conversation about the American canon of theater, I didn't have. But what I did know was the goosebumps when the curtain goes up. I do know the excitement of going to see something new, and that's where I landed. That's what I talked about until I could learn more about, you know, the rep we had there. And so at the meetings, you know, also so important to be magnanimous when you're asking people to do something for you. And so I would always take a gift. So we had lots of merchandise that was not being sold because we weren't selling tickets. And so I just would grab a T-shirt or a mug or a poster. So I began the meeting with that. On behalf of the Public Theater, thank you so much for allowing us to meet with you. That sentence alone opened the heart, and I could see it. I could actually see the person's life open up to, okay, now what's next? Or as opposed to, now what these people want from me. Y'all always call and come in here, you know, and that question about appropriation, appreciation, a very, very sensitive topic. So here you come, you want something more that's mine. You know, I know that's what they're thinking. And so the idea of giving a gift kind of softens that impact. And so we began to talk, and my first question was, so have you ever been? Yes, no. Did you like what you saw? Yes, no. Would you come back? Yes, no. So what we learned from the 300 visits that we did, we had nothing else to do. So that was our job. Just go and build this effort. You had to build it. What we learned was several things. One, they wanted to have a presence at the Public Theater. They didn't know anyone there, which is one of the reasons they didn't go. The building, it's a beautiful building. And you know, there's sometimes there's a perception that beautiful buildings doesn't mean I can go in if I'm from a certain economic background. There are other people who feel quite comfortable because this is how they grew up. And so there was that feeling. There was also a feeling of, but wait a minute, I want to do something on your stage as well. So I knew I couldn't address all of those issues in the meeting, but what we did say was thank you so much, and we will follow up. So the follow-up was critical. And so we did that. And so over the course of time, we built some institutional programs that address those issues that are still ingrained in the DNA of the Public Theater 20 years later from that time. So that was such an important step, you know, to go beyond the barriers, to not rely on email, to build a relationship, a partnership. This is face-to-face, life-to-life. This is the commitment that you have to make if this is the goal that you want to achieve. And so those are things that we worked on. Sandra also adds, there's no end date for diversity, bias awareness, or inclusion work. So we're not going to get there. There's not a there. We're constantly going to be working on this simply because the world keeps changing. Between immigration, migration, changing populations, blended families, there'll always be new definitions of what it looks like. So, you know, let's just make sure we're all on the same page with that. So those are just some points that I wanted to bring out. We talked about developing the culture of equity and inclusion. I think Sandra addressed that as well, which has a lot to do with, you know, what are my thoughts about this, and how am I educating my colleagues? So each of you, let's say you each work in a different organization, that's great. You're leading the charge, but what about your colleagues? Do they understand this as well? So community engagement is also internal. So we have to do the same work inside where we work as we do outside. We have to make sure everyone understands their role because it's all critical. The receptionists, the box office staff, your house staff, they're all part of translating what this looks like and feels like. So at the Public, you know, we're in New York, and, you know, maybe not today, but back in the day, some of the New York staff at the Public had the kind of attitude like, you know, I'm doing you a favor, I came to work today. And so it was not welcoming, and it was not the extension of the message that I was trying to create of welcome. And so rather than try to rehabilitate all of these people, George fired them, and we hired people who wanted to work there, who had the sense of mission, who were like, wow, this is great. Yes, we want to make this place a subway stop. So this is your due diligence. You've got to make sure that you're out here, planning and going to conferences and thinking about all these things you want to make happen. Well, who else is with you? Who's to your right and who's to your left? It has to be the people that you work with as well. I think that's really critical. So those are some of the tactics that I wanted to share with you. Looking at my time. There's other points as well. So when I talked about some of the points I wanted to share include innovation. And so things that I find really smart are the intersection between arts, culture, and business. Because arts are a business. I don't believe that there has to be poverty because we work in the arts. I don't believe we have to settle. And I don't believe just making budget is good enough. And so I am removing myself from that conversation. We talk about the arts and nonprofits that, we have to somehow, our gift to the world means that we live less than. No, I think that we can be smarter about this by looking at arts as a business, which doesn't mean we compromise the work. It means that we make money. How about that? Why not? And so there's a couple of projects, yes. Aren't you just tired of the poverty? To me, nonprofit arts does not equal poverty. But if we don't believe that, it will continue. So I'm encouraging you to start just thinking things a little differently. So there's a couple of commercial arts projects I wanted to share with you that I think are very successful. One of them is in Harlem, sponsored by the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce, which is the City Arts Council for Harlem. And they present a lot of cultural festivals. One of them is called Harlem Week, which is actually 3 months, over 100 events, but they won't change the name. So Harlem Week, just keep in mind, 100 events, 3 months. Okay, got it. And so the Chamber has a partnership with Havana, Cuba, with the artists there. They bring them over and they perform, and we send some of our artists over there. I'm on the board, Harlem Week. But one of the things that we do that I think is really smart, that informs the community of Harlem about a particular cultural group, Cubans, is this program we do called Harlem Havana. And what does it consist of? It's fashion designers, culinary artists, performers, visual artists, in a cultural exchange that utilizes the businesses in Harlem for promotion and access. So we start with the restaurants. All the restaurants want to prepare Cuban food. So we ask each of the restaurants in a certain geographical area in Harlem to have a Cuban dish on their menu. So now we can promote this as the restaurants are saluting Cuban cuisine. We asked some of the local fashion boutiques to feature Cuban design, and some of these designers are from Havana. And so now we have another conversation point, something else to talk about. Dance Theater of Harlem hosts Cuban dance workshops, so it becomes this array of looking at the different works. And then we close the event by having a big gala celebration at Harlem Hospital. Hospital's great partner. Great cultural partner. They have a huge lobby. And we bring in the artists, we bring in the Cuban music, the Cuban food from the different restaurants, and it is such an amazing celebration. So who are we touching? We're touching people who love fashion, people who eat in restaurants, people who dance, and the staff, and some of the patients, but primarily staff at the hospital. Now, all of them are now coming together to experience this Cuban cultural experience. And so these are ways that we can kind of advance the work, I think, using our local community partners. At the same time, we went to Whole Foods restaurant, which I'm sure, do you have Whole Foods here? Okay, great. Whole Foods is a great cultural partner. That's been my experience. So I encourage you, if you're not working with them, just ask the question and tell them, New York said. And so what Whole Foods did, they have a sandwich bar, and they turned it into a Cuban sandwich bar. And so for a whole week, they offer different kinds of Cuban sandwiches. So now you're popping into Whole Foods, and of course, with that comes the signage. Everything that I talk about has a marketing component to it. So I don't do anything in a vacuum. So everything is going to have social media, it's going to have print, it's going to have signs, posters, radio spots, all of those things. And that's how we start to change the culture and how people believe and perceive in their different experiences. So that was one example that I really wanted to share with you. I think, again, when we talk about innovation, we look at other programs. There's one that I'm working with now in Staten Island. Familiar with Staten Island? It's one of the 5 boroughs, a quiet borough, but an important one, nevertheless, that has a vibrant arts community. And so the Staten Island Arts Council decided that they want to develop their arts organizations there. They really want them to be much more involved in diversity. And so it's a 3-year initiative that we started with first educating the arts community about what diversity, equity, inclusion looks like. And we've taken a year to do that, which is a series of workshops that we have, constantly talking about it, unpacking it, putting it back together. Then we added a financial incentive for those who applied and had a sustainable plan. We would then work with them as consultants for the 2nd year, helping them to develop their plan. And that's where we are now. And it has really been significant change in how the arts are being perceived in Staten Island. Because the first response was, why do we have to do this? We're doing fine. People come out to our shows and we don't really need to do this kind of diversity work. And our response was, well, you have Liberians here, you have people from the Middle East, you have Mexicans. Are they coming to your performances? No. Well, don't you think they should? No. Okay, well, let's look at why this is important. And we talk about, just the reality of it. This is what America looks like right now, today. And so you want to be a part of that if you are representing the arts. So that's another really exciting initiative. So global. Obviously, this is a global conversation. I'm here in Canada, but I also want to let you know that my work has taken me around the world to talk about this because everyone is seeking the same answer. It doesn't matter where I'm going, whether it's South Africa, Australia, Moscow, we're just in Croatia. Everyone, it was one question around the world. How do I engage my community that looks different from me? That is the #1 question in the arts worldwide. Doesn't matter where I go, that's the question. And so clearly, there's an observation of this movement of different kinds of people, but also there's a need to have tactics and a philosophy and a strategy to respond to that. And so some of the things that, I'm inspired by in South Africa, in Bloemfontein, which is a small university town, they've developed an initiative based on the Truth and Reconciliation Act of South Africa that they're going to use the arts from the African community to be able to transform perceptions and build relationships. And they've been working very assiduously towards that. In Australia, which I've been to now 4 times, the arts administrators there are really focused on the Aboriginal community and, of course, the incoming immigrant community, primarily from the Middle East and Africa, North Africa in particular, just trying to figure out, now, how do we engage them in the arts? What does that look like? And so the result of these various lectures has been a program that my partner in Australia and I have created called Bite the Big Apple. So for the past 10 years, we have brought over arts administrators from Australia to New York for a week-long cultural arts crawl to various arts institutions who are doing the work so they can see what it looks like. There's one thing to have someone stand and tell you about it, but when it's an immersion in this full week, and we go to about 30 different cultural organizations, we can have one-on-one dialogue, that's begun to change the landscape there in Australia, particularly with the Aboriginal community, and just the respect and honor, as well as looking at programming, but also how do we make sure they're engaged in the work. And Moscow, of all places, I was so shocked when I got that email. I said, they've got to be kidding. What would they want me in Moscow for? But same question. They were trying to figure out not so much race and ethnicity, but more geography, lifestyle, economy. How do we get these various different elements to come together in one room to be able to enjoy the arts? And they're very much focused on teaching. They want their arts administrators, theater directors to really understand this. So one time I went to Sochi, which was about 2 months before the Olympics that was there a few years ago. And so I was with a group of theater directors, about 40 theater directors. So they said, okay, tonight's Donna's last night. We're going to salute. I didn't know what that meant. I thought we'd just go out for a drink. So 4 a.m. in the morning, we're still outside. One person bought a bag of sausage, another person bought a bag of bread, another person bought a bag of vodka. So that was it. And so every 2 minutes, salute Donna, drink. Another 2 minutes, salute Donna, United States, drink. This went on till 4 in the morning. That was the best time I've ever had. It was just wonderful because everyone's heart was in the room. If we lead with our heart, the arts will be there, you know, and that's what I experienced with them. So my point is that globally, we all, as what the Smith said at the beginning, we're all humans. That's the race that we are, and I keep seeing that more and more in the work. So I want you to continue to be encouraged to find the answers, because you're asking great questions. So to find the answers so that we can build a kind of, not just audiences, but also infrastructure, because you talked a bit about staffing. And frankly, I agree. I think that without the staff that reflects the community, it's very difficult. So how do you develop the staff? You develop a pipeline. And that leads to my last point about mentorship, which is critical. Each of you should have someone you are mentoring who will replace you. Successorship, critical in the arts in particular. You don't have to hold the seat for 30 years. Move on, do something else. You know, refresh this role so that there can be new perspectives, new ideas, and new experiences that can be brought to the table. I mean, really serious about that. I think mentorship is really important. And I think that that's one of the ways that we can diversify the field, that the person you choose to mentor does not look like you. You know, that's so important. So one of my mentors, I have 3 mentors. One of my mentors has a wonderful quote. His name is Daisaku Ikeda. And he talks about the relationship between mentor and mentee. And he says that's like a needle and thread. The mentor is the needle and the mentee is the thread. When sewing, the needle leads the way through the cloth. But in the end, it's unnecessary, and it's the thread that remains and holds everything together. So we should be thinking about what's the next 50 years going to look like? What will my orchestra be doing in the next 100 years? The answer to that is today. It's what you're doing today to foster that kind of interest and support and welcoming new ways of thinking that always supports the integrity of the work. We're never talking about changing the essence of what it is that we do, but we can certainly look at different perspectives and tactics and individuals who can help us with that. And so I think that the mentors have to be passionate. We should be highly skilled. We should be successful so that we can encourage other people to want to work with us. And it doesn't have to be just young people that we mentor. It's just someone else who may not have access or exposure. So for me, being a mentor is the #1 goal in my life. That is who I am and what I do. I've been teaching since 1993. At one time, I was teaching at 5 different universities. After I decided I was about to kill myself, I reduced that to 3. So now I'm at 2, and it's all good. And I believe that, you know, I can probably point to a number of different cultural institutions of young people and other arts administrators that I've encouraged to take on this challenge and to advance and move forward with the work. So I'm really encouraging you to think that way. I would, to conclude by saying, you know, cultural diversity now has to be a cornerstone of all of the arts that we do, of all of facets of what we do. And I think that the more seriously we can take this business of the art and take responsibility for cultivating new generations, for being bold and brave to go into new neighborhoods and new communities we may not have been, along with ambassadors who can help open the doors, that those are ways that we can start to see success. And I encourage you to determine what success looks like for you. Please don't let anyone tell you what success is for your orchestra. You decide what that is. Then you share that so we all can support that mission. And then that's when we can really look at, you know, how do we accomplish that goal. And so leadership becomes really, really critical. And one last statement from Daisaku Ikeda, where he talks about the world that we live in today. I think you have a different kind of experience here than we're currently experiencing in America, but needless to say, it's quite troublesome and challenging. I'm so glad I work in the arts. I probably wouldn't be alive, so I'm really happy I'm in the arts. So Daisaku Ikeda says, you know, to usher in a global renaissance. So how do we just change the landscape around the world? Because each of you should be thinking you're a global citizen. And while you may be working here in Canada, your work's going to take you all over the world, either physically or a footprint of your work. And so he says that, you know, the world in which we live today, jarred as it is by inexorable, dramatic change, demands new expressions of creative wisdom. It eagerly awaits, all of you, the appearance of individuals who are imbued with vision and energy and can be trusted to build a grander, better world. Because ultimately, I believe that's why we're in the arts. We want to make it better, a lot better. So I thank you very much, and I think we have 5 minutes if you have any questions. Yeah.